all of a sudden it's like a light switch went on and it's like their brain can work now. When the brain is starving for nutrients, it's not going to function. Just like if your car doesn't have enough fuel in it, it's not going to run very far. It's going to put done.
Are meal times a serious struggle? Does your child eat a limited number of foods? Does your child eliminate entire food groups? Are you tired of waiting for them to just grow out of it? Welcome to How to Unpicky Your Picky Eater, where you'll learn strategies to help your picky eater expand their palate. With Christine Yoder, a pediatric feeding specialist, speech pathologist, mom of a child with feeding issues, and author of Mealtime Mindset. Let's get started. Here's Christine.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. Today, we have a very special guest. Her name is Greer McGinnis, and she is a specialty dietitian. So she has some specialty trainings and does a lot of work with functional medicine. And she does a lot of tests. So all different types of testing, nutritional testing, gut testing, metal testing. So she's going to tell us all about how all of these things help with not just picky eating, but really healing and helping the whole person. So take a listen. So hi, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
Do you want to explain exactly all of the letters after your name? You have so many certifications. Like, tell people what exactly you do.
Yeah, somebody called it alphabet soup.
Yeah.
I'm determined to get a lot of initials. So I really like going to doing like school and certifications and stuff. So I have a master's in health science with a focus on epidemiology, so research. I have a bachelor's in science as well. I'm a registered dietitian by trade, so I'm a licensed registered RD. I'm a certified dietetic nutritionist, certified LEAP therapist, which specializes and works with people with food sensitivities and food allergies. I'm a certified detox specialist. Detoxing is one of my specialties, like heavy metals, environmental toxins, mold from kiddos and people. I'm a certified master herbalist, so I really do use a lot of herbs in my practice, and I wanted to know more about herbs and their safety. So I thought that was really an important thing. I'm also a certified Lyme practitioner, but I don't really treat or work with Lyme too much because once I went through the certification, I went, wow, that's a lot. And I'm like, I don't know if I really want to do all of that, but it was very good and interesting. And I learned a ton of information, and now I can kind of spot people who may have Lyme disease or kiddos who have Lyme disease and then get them the proper treatment that they need.
That's amazing. And actually, it's funny you mentioned Lyme's because I feel like sometimes there's like people get like diagnosed with something else, but it's actually Lyme's, like they find out later on.
Yeah.
Right? Does that happen a lot? I mean,
all the time.
It's not your specialty. But...
So the CDC has not updated their criteria for diagnosing Lyme since the 1970s. So if you got bit by a tick a week or two ago, basically what they're going to do is they're going to put you on some rounds of antibiotics and call it a day. Now, say for instance, in a few years from now, from that tick bite, you start having joint pain, like and your knees start to hurt, or you have massive headaches, or, stiff neck and feeling off all the time. That is something called chronic Lyme disease. And it could stem back from when that time you did get bit by a tick and you were treated, but unfortunately you were not followed up on. You maybe not have been on the antibiotics for a long period of time. So there is something called chronic Lyme that the CDC does not recognize at all. A lot of Western medicine doctors do not acknowledge chronic Lyme, only acute Lyme. Like if they don't feel like it affects you later on. And that's why you have things like ILADs now, which are more of functional practitioners working with treating chronic Lyme disease patients, because they created their whole entity of support because of that whole situation. So things like MS, autism, ADHD, cardiovascular issues, joint pain, like a whole slew of issues could be related to actual chronic Lyme disease, and most people don't even know. So
That's
yeah.
amazing. But like, that's so good for people to know, because sometimes you just hear like, wait a second, maybe that might, it might like trigger like something in someone's brain to be like, let me just like research this a little bit more. Like this might be a key.
Well, yeah, and because I detox like toxins, especially things like mold and Lyme disease have very overlapping symptoms.
Oh,
So I'm able to utilize my knowledge into identifying, does this patient really have mold, which they suspect a lot of the times because they Google the symptoms, and a lot of the times mold will come up before Lyme disease will come up. Or is it Lyme disease that is their underlining, issue? So it's kind of like what is it? Like what symptom is causing your issues, kind of thing. So
it's so fascinating to me. And I mean, I've known you now for a few years, and I feel like every time I talk to you, I learn like something new, and it's so interesting. I love talking to you. But the why we actually met was because I wanted you to do gut testing on my son, and then I ended up doing it on myself. And I think we did micronutrient testing too on him. And I could not believe all the information that I got back from that. It was incredible. Like it was a 30-page report on poop, and it's just like mind blowing. But, we've had so many parents that, I suspect that there's some sort of a gut issue because, it's not even just that they're picky, but they might have had really bad reflux, or they keep throwing up food, or they have weird bowel movements. Like there's something off in a, like, as like I see like those symptoms. And they say, oh, I went to my GI doctor and like they said everything was fine. And I'm like, I don't think you got like a 30-page poop report. So like this is different. So
yeah.
you can explain to parents, because I feel like a lot of times they just say, well, like I went to the doctor and they said everything's okay. Like, and I even have a hard time saying like why this is different and why those doctors don't give those types of reports. But I think it's important.
So it depends on what you're going to the doctor for. Now, remember, our medical system is really good at emergency situations. If there is something that is emergent, you were in a car accident or you were pooping blood and stuff like that, our medical system is great where we have the tools to say, okay, this is how we can save your life. This is how we can fix you. We're identifying the problem. You might have a polyp, etc. So Western medicine is great for that. Right now, an emergency situation. When it comes to root cause or what is the underlying cause of something, a lot of the times they just give diagnosis and a pill. That's basically what their job is to try to diagnose the problem and then figure it out. Like, what is the pill that remedies the solution? So again, when you have kiddos who are autism, ADHD, which you and I have a lot of those, their biggest one is constipation. So what happens? They go to the doctor. The doctor says, well, they're constipated. It's not ever, are they drinking enough? Do they get enough fiber? What's going on? Do they have parasites or anything like that? It's okay, here, to just give them Miralax. And these are parents that are waiting literally months for an appointment with a GI specialist just to be told, well, your kid has chronic constipation. Here's Miralax.
Yeah.
And that's all you get, and there's so much. And I think what upsets me as a practitioner is now that I know that there is so much more out there, there are so many other things that can be a causing this issue being a problem. Why aren't they kind of picking up the pace here and saying, hey guys, listen, these people are treating chronic constipation with these few supplements and remedies, and like maybe we should take a point out of their playbook, and it's still like, we should be working together. I always, say, I think there's a place for Western medicine and there's a place for functional medicine, and we should be cohesively working together. And unfortunately, that is not happening.
It's not. And I find we've had actually cases where we work together, and sometimes the medications they give actually cause more harm.
Mhm.
I'm just thinking of a case, we won't mention the name, but a lot of vomiting, and there was reflux medication given. And it really wasn't until we got him off of the reflux medication that he started to improve and stop vomiting. And it's like, oh, like I wish they kind of would have put that together.
Well, it's the white lab coat syndrome. We have been taught to believe that the people in the white lab coat know all the answers. We didn't go to med school. We didn't go to residencies and stuff. I mean, I did my internship. I worked in hospitals. I worked under doctors. I worked with doctors, but it's still when I wore a white lab coat, but I was still just the dietitian. I wasn't looked at as anything special until I started kind of claiming my piece, saying like, listen, like this is what we need to start doing. So with that particular case, it was, it's that was the problem. The kid had acid reflux, was vomiting. What is the practical part of medicine is you give acid reflux medication, not to mention that those things cause cancer. We know that the kids that have been on Zantac, we know 15 years later after we created Zantac, oh gosh, now it causes cancer. Now we know that, but we still prescribe different versions of it. It's like, come on guys, get it together. But yeah, so once I explained that to the parents, and I explained actually when you decrease the stomach acids, in that person, now they're not producing the, enzymes to digest their food. So now we have lack of mineral absorption, nutrient absorption, and the kid wasn't gaining weight. Kid was deficient. Kid wasn't, still vomiting. Took the kid off, put him on some different supplements. Poof, all of a sudden he is doing better. He's feeling better. He stopped vomiting. It's like, gosh, like it's not rocket science. I think that's the funny thing to me is like, I figured it out. How come everyone else can't figure it out? This isn't rocket science. This isn't something that's tremendously hard to figure out. It's actually quite easy. It just depends on who wants to listen.
Totally agree. And the nutrient deficiencies, like that's like kind of a good segue. I feel like, my population that I predominantly work with, they have such a limited diet. They're severely picky eaters. Some parents, they hear the word ARFID and that gets thrown around too. But the bottom of it is that they're not eating enough foods that have nutrients in it. And even if they are eating some foods, those foods sometimes are lacking in minerals just because of like the soil that we have in America. And it's just
that and the
deficient.
crunchy. I mean, if you look at like what do kids on the spectrum love? Crunchy air. Anything that they could crunch that like has like no calories, no real and that's what they want to snack on and eat all day. So getting them calorie nutritious dense food is sometimes really hard. It's funny, because my oldest is on the spectrum. He has ARFID. And we've done feeding therapy and stuff. And now, since we've done so much with him, he's so much more open to, eating and stuff. But like my little guy is like 5 and he's like, can I have beans for dinner? And I'm like, absolutely. I forget what it's like to have like a neurotypical child who's like, goes through these waves of like, I want to eat nutrition. He's like, I want to have, and he'll eat carrots for breakfast. He loves carrots. And I'm like, okay, like, I don't argue with him. I'm just like, sure, no problem. You can have carrots for breakfast. And then he'll be like, oh, can I have veggie straws? But, it's, what we want to do. And part of this is our faults as a parent is like, we want to give, especially when we have a child on the spectrum is we forget where they're at cognitively and everything. So we just a lot of the times just give in, and that's sometimes where we kind of fault. And I'm at fault for that too, because I didn't realize it at the time until I realized how much I babied him, compared to his brother who's neurotypical. I'm like, oh, he's fine. But so sometimes what we need to do is kind of take a step back and look at our own self, how we're parenting, how we're introducing foods, how we're encouraging foods and stuff, and kind of say, I've had parents that are like, oh no, he won't eat that. Don't serve him that. It's like, well, how do you know? Try, don't just cut it off, because I've done that. I was at a party and I'm actually allergic to green melon, so honeydew melon. I've never bought it because I was allergic to it. So I just never ate it, not realizing that my kids aren't allergic to it. And we were at a family function and somebody brought a fruit platter and my son ran over and was attracted to the green melon and ate like a whole bowl. And I was like, wow, like even my issues with food will pass on to them too if I'm not careful enough. So
100%. That's like so easy. Actually, I think that's like a big piece of it is even just things that we've picked up and learned from when we were at the dinner table with our parents, things they
yeah,
said and how they viewed meal times, like that all plays into how we parent too.
yeah,
Absolutely. Now,
yeah.
do you find
And
there's a lot of oh, sorry, you can go.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, do you find, you know, a lot of kids who have limited diets that they're, you know, all of the nutrients that they're lacking that affects like, you know, ADD is so prevalent today. And, you know, sometimes I wonder like how much of it is linked to, you know, they're just not getting like what their brain needs to focus
Yeah.
and function. Even, you know, not all just that, but, you know, there's even things within the autism spectrum and symptoms that people see that I wonder if some of it is related to just not having enough or maybe too much of something. You know, do you find
Well,
that in your practice?
yeah. So, what people fail to kind of understand. So, first off, let's just go off and take the cat out of the bag. Autism and ADHD is not just based on genetics. Okay. We have three main components that cause autism and ADHD. You have genetics, which is a component, can be a component. You have environmental and you have metabolic.
Mhm.
So there are three different potential causes for autism and ADHD. Genetics can be part of it where it's not an abnormality where someone will says, oh, my kid did a genetic testing, he's positive for the PQ128 gene or whatever that might be associated with autism. I'm not talking about that, but other things like methylation, how they detox or how they absorb certain nutrients can affect them also with the environment. So our genetics have not changed. So we need to understand that our genetics for the past hundreds of years have not changed. The one thing that has changed is our environment. So when a kid is growing up, their brain will be about 90% developed by the time they're going into kindergarten. So if you look at nutrient needs during the first 500 or 5 years of life, or what they call the 1000 days, which is up to about 3, you have a bunch of peaks and valleys. So iron, for instance, will peak at 3 months, at 9 months, at 12 months, so certain nutrients are going to be needed for creating and developing the neurons and the brain as the child grows.
Mhm.
So that's why all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, my kid's eating like all day. Like he's eating like, he should be 500 pounds because he's eating like a horse. Well, that means that they're going through some type of growth spurt, that brain jump where they just need all this nutrition during this times. And that's what they're going to start craving certain things. So during that time, if kids aren't getting the nutrients that they need, there's something called the sensitive period where there's like a critical period and a sensitive period. So critical period, that means like if your baby was in your utero and you didn't give them folic acid or folate, they could develop spinal bifida. That is a critical period of development. And that can happen also during the first 5 years of life. There could be a critical time where that kid needed a ton of iron, didn't get it, and it affected something that was supposed to be developed in the brain.
Mm.
Then we have these sensitive periods. And this is what you might see too when you're working with some of my patients, is all of a sudden my patients are like doing 10 times better because we supplemented them with proper nutrition. And they have these sensitive periods where their brain is very, what we call plasticity. A kid bounce back pretty well that once they get supplemented with the correct nutrients, all of a sudden it's like a light switch went on and it's like their brain can work now. When the brain is starving for nutrients, it's not going to function. Just like if your car doesn't have enough fuel in it, it's not going to run very far. It's going to put done.
Right.
Same concept for kids where they need specific nutrients during specific times, but giving them those nutrients definitely, there's tons of research. I can't even tell you how many. I did a summit for the Autism Parenting magazine on this whole entire topic of nutrition and brain and what nutrients are needed for the brain. And I researched, I think, dozens and dozens of articles just showing that kids with ADHD had low zinc, low magnesium, low vitamin D, low omega. Like, I mean, it was just like, you name the nutrient, it was low in a kid with autism and ADHD. And once you supplemented with them, it was like, you know, their cognition improved, their motor skills improved, their verbal skills improved. It was like, you know, so it's crazy, but like people really underestimate the power of nutrients and those nutrition pieces that these kids' brains are actually missing.
I know. And I mean, I'm such a big supporter of that. I mean, I've always kind of been a little obsessed with like healthy foods even before I was pregnant, but after I had you know, my son Luke, and he struggled so much with learning to speak, some sensory issues. You know, I mean, aside from the feeding and the tongue tie, like he actually had other like learning. He got special ed, he got speech, he got OT for, you know, all through early intervention. And he did not make an ounce of progress until I started doing more of the supplements, like those omega-3s, the vitamin E I was giving him, that choline, phosphol, that like
Phosphatidylcholine, PC.
yes, it's a crazy but like, I mean, it was like his brain just like it was like starving for this stuff. And like once it got it, it was like you said, a light bulb went off, and it was like all of a sudden he was able to absorb like what the therapists were trying to get through to him. But it was like there was a wall up. It was
I usually call it like a dam. There's usually like a dam, and many kids, like I had a kid, she's 4.5 now. She's never spoken. And we started doing similar things with nutrition and detoxing. And part of what we talked about the supplements is they're all antioxidants. So what is happening when your body's filled with toxins is it tanks your antioxidants, which is the powerhouse of your mitochondrial, which is your ATP energy. It makes you go. So once we started giving this girl what she needed and working on pulling some of those toxins out of her system, the dad called me and was like, she just started talking. She said, "Daddy, up," going upstairs, and then grabbed him by the hand and pulled him upstairs. And she goes, "Okay, Daddy, now downstairs." And he was like, you know, this is the first time I've actually heard my daughter talk to me. And like, you know, she talks, but it's just all like, you know, no functional language whatsoever. This is like the first time she was like cognitively aware and functioning. And, you know, it's amazing for me, you know, when I start seeing these kids thrive. And, you know, it's a catch-22, and I understand the concept. Now, when you're looking at these types of kids, are they really autistic? Are they really on the spectrum? Most of the time, no. And there's a fine line.
You said that, because honestly, in my brain, I'm like, these seem like just symptoms of something. And they put it together under an umbrella and they call it a label. But I'm like, but is it? I always question that too. I'm like, because sometimes I just, you know, I'm like, well, they have like little pieces of it. But I was like, well, is that really just a symptom of something that they're lacking?
It's that and other, like, so anytime you have nutrient deficiencies, that can cause cognitive delay. And what your cerebellum, you know, all these different components of your brain do different things. Your social emotional skills, your verbal skills, your musical skills, your art skills. I mean, you know, is it your right side of the brain hemisphere or the left side of your hemisphere? So you have that component, because if you look at a lot of the trends, a lot of these kids were born neurotypical. They progressed and then all of a sudden regressed at a specific age. So it's like, you know, that's not autism. That is environmental toxic load that impacted or something, you know, a gut, you know, I've seen it where just, you know, kids have all of a sudden these like 4 or 5 ear infections. They're on tons of antibiotics, and then all of a sudden they regressed because you damage the gut, which is the powerhouse to the body too, which damages the brain. So it's like you have these, you know, and that's where I think, you know, Being on social media is hard because I get a lot of flack from autistic adults or adults with autism, because they're like, well, you can't cure autism. You can't. I'm like, listen, I'm not trying to cure specific autism. Like, I'm trying to support these kids who don't have autism. They have toxicity load. They have, chemically induced autism, or what we're calling autism, but it's not really true autism. There's a huge difference in, an abnormality from birth that cognitively prevented somebody from developing normally, and kids who are regressing because of a toxic load. If we look at like lead back in the 60s and 70s, that was like our first look at how damaging heavy metals could be on developing kids. It's estimated it was like something crazy, nearly 9 million like IQ points or something like that were lost during that time frame. It had served so many deaths. Like, it was crazy. Some of the numbers of how they realized that lead was like so toxic and damaging these kids and their brain. It prevented them from speaking. It caused ADHD. It caused autism. It's like, it didn't cause autism. It caused like a neurodevelopmental issue.
The symptoms, right? That you see with it. And I totally agree. And I mean, that could be like a whole other conversation. The toxin load. There's so many things in our environment that have changed in
and that's 40 to 50%
years
of our environment, of our 40 to 50% of autism is due to environmental influences. So, and that's been acknowledged through references and research and stuff. So 40 to 50% of kids diagnosed with autism is not genetic. It's actually environmental.
Yeah. And also you got to think with genetics too, people living in the same house with the same culture, eating the same foods, their environment is also the same. So it's really hard to tease that out, I would think, unless there was I don't know, maybe there are very good genetic tests that could tease that out, but I don't know.
Well, yeah, I use, I really love 3x4 genetics. They're really good at looking at just detoxification, methylation, fatty acid oxidation, like a lot of that more of environmental and genetic component. If you wanted to, and I had gene mapping done with my son, and many of my patients do it too with a geneticist. And guess what? Comes back, everything's fine. No genetic abnormality. I would say literally a handful of patients of mine actually found me and say, hey, my son just got diagnosed with this and this gene. There's not much information about it. Can you help? And it's like some random gene that they're just like, well, we think it has an association with autism and stuff, but we don't know how and why. It's like, because we really just don't know so much still about genetics, and it's still in an infancy stage of how it plays a role into our lifestyle.
So interesting. And I know the gut, like you did mention very briefly, but there is a very strong gut-brain connection.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens in the gut with all of the bacteria you need and being able to absorb, it directly affects how the brain works. And I also, like, do you also find that like taste and smell, it can affect like if someone's even feeling hungry or like has an interest in food? Do you ever have that happen?
So you have a couple different things of what I found. One, you have like interconception, where you're just not aware of like fullness, have like, you're not just aware of like your senses, you could, and another part of it is between the right and the left hemisphere of the brain actually influences your like senses as well. Does it, one of doctors that I've seen for my son actually had him smell essential oils. One was peppermint, one was lemon. And he like held it up to his nose, smelled it. He smelled the other one. He told him, this is lemon, this is peppermint. And then he blindfolded him and then had him smell it. And he couldn't differentiate the smells because his whole entire senses were off, because between his right and his left brain are not connected correctly for some strange reason. So with doing like neurofeedback and stuff like that, like it's been like a whole different experience. But it was very interesting. I never thought about his sense of smell with things, that they could be completely off, and that could be why he's such a picky eater, why he's food advertent, avoidant to certain things. And it was like, that kind of was like an aha moment for me too. And I was like, wow, that could mean that he just didn't, like, he smells things, and how I smell and how he smells it, it's not connecting and registering the exact same way. Anytime you have kids that are picky eaters and stuff, it damages the gut. I mean, in retrospect, in order to, I'll ask you a fun question. So in order to diversify and have a very healthy microbiome, how many whole foods do you think you need to eat per week in order to have that happen?
Oh my gosh. I have no idea. Maybe like 30 like different types? Like
How many different types of whole
30?
foods per week? 35 to 40.
Oh, I was like, okay, good.
So that, I mean, that's a lot. I mean,
Yeah,
if you're
it is.
looking,
Well, our picky eaters, they're getting like maybe like 15. So
if
that's
you're
like less
on
than-
rotation, not even diversified, but on rotation. So in order to have a very healthy microbiome, you need to be eating 35 to 40 whole foods per week. And that is kind of like, when I explain that to a parents, they just like look at me like, how? Like, how do I do this? Like, that's crazy. So it's hard. But that's what makes up a healthy microbiome. So you can see that if you're not getting a very diverse diet, and most of our kids and people, we're creatures of habit. You know, I know adults that eat the same breakfast, eat the same lunch every day, and maybe dinner is different, but they eat a lot of the same thing every single day. And that actually works against us. It's like 90% of our foods that we consume are mostly processed now. And it's, what do we think is going to happen when that, you know, our microbes in our gut are living organisms, and they need healthy, beneficial food in order for us to thrive. And we're unfortunately we're not doing it. And that will affect any type of growth. You know, we do have, unfortunately, you know, for a healthy microbiome, we do have things like yeast and fungi and stuff like that in our body. It's needed, it's essential. But I say that your microbes have to play nice on the playground with one another. And if things don't work out the way that we want them to, they're pathogenic. Those pathobiomes get to overgrow and take over. And unfortunately, what they release in their toxins negatively impact our brain.
Yeah, I think so many parents don't even realize that there could be an overgrowth of bad bacteria in their gut that's like wreaking havoc and causing problems for their kids or them themselves.
Yeah,
Like,
that's
there's
most
so
of our
many-
constipated kiddos. It's the pathobionts. It's the pathogens overgrow. And a lot of times, like, parents think that their constipated kiddos are just being difficult or they're withholding, and they are, but sometimes it's not even related to them. They're not doing it on purpose. It's because of their gut. It's the gut that's inflamed, causing them to have the overgrowth that's preventing them from actually stooling correctly.
Wow, that's amazing. And I'll just ask you quick about anxiety, because a lot of our kids who are picky are not just picky, they have a fear of food. And that they're, you know, unwilling to almost take that first step and just give it a try. It's more than just trying it and saying like, no, thanks. It's like they won't even, they're like afraid to even put it in their mouth. And do you find that nutrients are linked to anxiety or deficiency in nutrients? How to maybe reinforce those feelings of like anxiousness and stress?
Well, if you think about it, like, you have multiple connections here. So like in your gut, dopamine and serotonin, which is your feel good, you know, kind of mood stabilizing hormones and stuff for the neurotransmitters, are made in the gut. So if those aren't being able to make, that's going to throw you off. And then also a lot of nutrients like your B vitamins, your B3, your B6, your B5, etc., zinc, vitamin D, are also needed to make neurotransmitters between your glutamate and GABA, which is your excitatory receptor, and your calming receptors. So if you're nutrient deficient, those neurotransmitters that could be helping your child calm and, you know, relax and not be so stressed out and anxious could be faulty. And that's why you're getting those outward signs of anxiety, because they're nutrient deficiency. Hippocrates says all diseases stem from the gut. And I'm a full believer in that. I literally, that's like the first thing I work on is gut and nutrients before I even tackle anything else, because that is the root of all evil, of what is abnormal or going wrong in the body.
That's amazing. I know. I feel like in a perfect world, what you do, that would be a physical. Like everyone should go and get like checked out their physical. Like, what's your gut standing? What are you deficient in? Do you have an overgrowth of anything? What are the toxins we need to detox this year? Like, right, in a perfect world, that would be what a physical actually is for people. But
yeah, they won't even do vitamin D and stuff like that anymore at the doctor's office, because the insurance companies decided that they were going to stop paying for it, because they just said everyone was low. So they actually will stop paying for being proactive in your health and doing those things unless you have a specific diagnosis like diabetes, anxiety, autism, ADHD. You have to actually have that as a specific diagnosis now in order to do any type of proactive testing.
Oh, I know, that makes me mad. But knowledge is power, right? So I feel like that's why we're doing this right now, is hopefully that, it'll, someone will learn something new that they didn't know before, and they'll be like, wait a second, let me just look into this. And it might totally turn things around for, even myself, right? I started out with, hey, I want you to check out my son. I want to make sure everything's balanced here and good. But wait a second, maybe I should also get checked, because I know I'm not perfect. And I remember coming back much worse than he was. And you were like, whoa, we have to like take a look at your gut, Christine, because like things need to change.
Well, you also have to understand, when you're older, you've had decades of storing toxins and going through different medications and antibiotics and sicknesses and stuff like that, building your immune system and stuff. So kids sometimes have their own set of craziness, and then adults have their whole other set of abnormalities too, just because of, where we're at in our life. So it's not uncommon for parents to get their test results back and go, whoa.
Yeah, I know. It's so important too. I think it's everything. It's like the basis of which we like live, like your health is like everything. It's gold. So it's better than gold. So without it, you have nothing. So
there's a new there's a new preventative MRI scan system that I found in New York City that I might go do for my birthday, which is just literally like a full body scan, just to check you out and make sure, I'm in the health industry. I see some crazy stuff all the time. And it's like my biggest fear of like not knowing what's going on inside my body. So it's like, we try to live as healthy as we can, but sometimes, again, I wasn't this healthy my whole entire life, unfortunately. So it's definitely something that I want to, that I think everyone should be. I've done stool testing on myself, toxin testing. That's how I found out I had mold. I was sick for a very long time, and, I didn't know why, and found out that I had mold from a moldy office building. So, sometimes I think it's always a good thing just to rule out, make sure you're okay. Check that box off. Like, man, I don't have this. Like, I feel good, and I think that's an important thing, to be as proactive as you can for your health, for your child too.
Yeah, it's so important. And you do like very, very important work, because not everybody can. I'll tell you, I had no idea what that 30-page thing meant. When you had to kind of like translate it for me. I was like, the bacteria I've never heard of.
It's an art form. I mean, listen, we're still learning about the human body and how it works in our gut system. I mean, every day we learn something new about our whole entire body systems and stuff, and what supplement can help with this, and what, herb can help with that. And that's like the beautiful thing about, medicine, is that we're constantly advancing. But for anyone who's listening, like, just don't take, if it doesn't sound right and it doesn't feel right, it's probably not right. And, when I first started my journey and I took my son to the doctor, he only ate like 5 or 6 things. And he's like, oh, his lab work came back normal. And I'm like, how is that even possible? Like, there's no way. Like, I'm a dietitian, like, he eats 5 things. Like, that's impossible. So when I found a functional medicine doctor and we started running tests, like, all these things kept coming back abnormal. And I was like, yes, like, I felt vindicated, because I was, and validated, because I was like, I knew something was wrong. Like there's just no way I mean, so to me, it was like a big like light bulb aha moment that I was like, oh my gosh, like there's this whole other system and the whole world out there that could be helping my son, and no one's talking about it. And why, once I started my son had positive Epstein-Barr virus. He at 4.5, 5, he was having raging Epstein-Barr virus. He had yeast overgrowth in his gut. He had heavy metal toxicity. He had, it was like all these things that I was like, wow, like nobody said anything that was a possibility. And then once it was treated, it was like night and day.
Right. And I think, it's just not part of their training. They're, like you said, they're trained to administer medicine. They're not trained to understand nutrition. They don't have training in nutrition, doctors. They don't have training in herbs and heavy metals. That's not part of their thing. I mean, I disagree. I think it should be, but I'm not in charge of creating the coursework that a doctor goes through. But if I was, I would definitely include those things. So
I've had many parents actually bring the testing to their doctor, and the doctor's like, well, I don't know how to read this. Like they're like completely, they're like, not for me, so it's really interesting. This whole other side of medicine that I found and stumbled upon, and I, appreciate it all the time. And it's been amazing for my own son. It's been amazing for you guys. It's been amazing for your patients and my patients. And, and that's really what it's all about. Just the more education I can get out there is like, huge for me.
Yeah. Now tell people like what kind of things you offer and how they can find you to get help from you.
Yeah. So my website is biomedicalhealingforkids.com, and that's my Instagram handle. And I have a Facebook group. I created the Facebook group actually first as a community because I wanted to kind of showcase what I was doing for my son for other parents. And that's how it kind of grew into a practice for me. So I work one-on-one, and I also do group training courses. I'll be relaunching my rebalance course soon, which walks parents through diet, nutrition, detoxing, herbs, supplements, all that. And, what I try to do is we work together on what works best for you and your family. Like, so some of my families right off the bat don't want to do blood work, which is fine. And, it's like wrestling an alligator, and that's something that we don't want to sometimes deal with. So, all the testing is done in your home. The kits come right to your home. You collect the stool, you collect the urine, you send it out. We get the results, we go over it, and we put a plan in place which is individualized for your specific child. It's not a cookie cutter, for everybody. It's like, what is going to work best for him or her? And then, we follow up and we meet as needed to figure out how to continue our path and growth. So, it's worked out amazing for a lot of my patients, and I'm very blessed with it.
Yeah, well, it's amazing. I mean, that's just, like knowledge is power, and you have a whole lot of knowledge. So, but thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And I really, I know that all of the information that we talked about today is going to like change people's lives if they're listening. So, is there any final words or anything else I missed that you really want to share?
I usually just always end with test, don't guess. It's really important. We can put every child on supplements, but it's usually like throwing spaghetti at a wall and hoping something's going to stick. We really need to test, which gives us the individuality. And that's really what functional medicine is about, is the individuality of getting to the root cause and supporting that kid on every level.
Absolutely. I think that's great advice. I love it. All right. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to How to Unpicky Your Picky Eater. To learn more about achieving your child's feeding goals, check out Christine's website at foodologyfeeding.com. And be sure to tune in next time to How to Unpicky Your Picky Eater.